常々思っていましたが。
How's it going, everyone? My name is Michael SK, and welcome back to Witch on the Holy Night. We're still in Chapter 8.5. We found out the sort of situation that Soujyuro has involved himself in. A bit of a, I don't know if you want to call it a pyramid scheme specifically, but it definitely is like a scam-ish type of business that's going on here. And Soujyuro has no idea what he's doing. So we're going to, I guess you could say, attack this company. And we have brought on the services of the sister that we met over at the church back in chapter 1.5.
あなたには年長者への敬意が足りていないようですね。
Huh?
Tobimaru and Kinomi had returned from their tasks and stood there wide-eyed. I meant to say Kinomi, not the way that I said it the first time, but the person Aoko had invited to the cafe looked so out of place that it was a shock to everyone.
はーい、ゆいかさん。わざわざ来てもらって助かるわ。事情は電話で説明したけど、もう少し詳しく説明する？結構です。本物の光のことは、先ほど律香から報告を受けましたから。あなたに享受していただく事柄は一つもありません。ありゃま、ご機嫌なのね。よかった。そのテンションのまんま勝ち込みお願いね。一般人の一人や二人、ゆいかさんが本性を出せば睨むだけでそっとさせられるでしょ。
そうなの？このお姉さん、相田教会のシスターさんだよね。俺密かに憧れてたんですけど。いや、そんな場合じゃねえ。どうも、木南浩介っす。青崎さんとはあんまり仲良くありません。
Hey, at least you're being honest about that. Kinomi was clearly trying to earn points by showing that he also was not that friendly with Aoko. Sister Yuika gave him an angelic smile back.
これはご丁寧に。相田教会で装飾を務める須瀬ゆいかです。はじめまして、大介さん。
いやー、すんげえ。本当にシスターだよ、シスター。会長、とんでもない隠し玉連れてきたな。あれ？でもゆいかさんに何してもらうの？いや、俺はいてくれるだけで嬉しいけど。
まあ、大体想像できるが。はじめまして、シスターゆいか。三崎高校生徒会副会長、築地飛丸です。
Tobimaru didn't look so well. Perhaps he had figured out where this course of events was headed. The JLS label was indeed illegal. This discovery made Aoko realize how they could get the victim's money back and run the Light of Truth out of town completely. Sister Yuika was her solution.
てっきり証拠に物を言わせて、訴えられたくなければ示談で済ませろ、全額返して出ていけって話かと思ったが、恐ろしい女だぜ。追い出すだけじゃなく、スカンピンにして放り出そうって腹か。
は？なんでそうなるの？何？美人なだけじゃなくシスターさんってそんな権利持ってるの？
シスターさんがじゃなくてゆいかさんの人間力と言うべきね。はい、これ被害者の会からの連名書。一応うちの応援団の先輩たちも待機してるけど、何人か連れていく？そうですね。逆上して手を挙げられては後片付けが面倒ですので、抑止力として5人ほど。あとは青子さんが同行してくれるのでしたら、私としては不満はありません。
え？どういうこと？もしかしてシスターさんが話つけに行くの？
いいのいいの。ゆいかさんはこう見えて荒事の専門家なんだから。ねえ、ゆいかさん。あなたほどではありませんが。いいでしょう。今回は利益が一致します。あの事務所の方々が違法を働いているのは事実ですから。罪には罰を、善良な人々を、特に私たちの同胞を苦しめた手合いには相応の痛みが必要です。
Okay, we're gonna bring down the wrath of God, I guess.
さすが泣く子も
It's
黙
one
る
way
鬼
of
の
going
シスタ
about it, I
ー。
guess.
期待してるわ。昔から商売敵を潰すのは得意だものね。言われるまでもありません。一つの土地に二つの教えがあっては迷惑です。
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they're also like, that's also how they're operating as well, in a religious sense. Though the two continued to antagonize each other, they entered the office building fighting for the same team. The 5 burly members of the cheer team filed in behind them. They had left behind a glum Tobimaru and a completely clueless Kinami.
わかんねえ。青崎、あの美人さんに何やらせる気なんだよ。
そりゃお前、口にはできない残虐行為だろ。相手の弱みを握ったら、とことん叩きのめすのが青崎だからな。
I'm fairly certain Kinami kind of saw a little bit of that at one point.
違法販売をネタにして、契約解除をさせた後に告訴するって流れ。訴えるのはシスターの役目だな。立場上、学生である青崎よりシスターの方がお題目が立つ。何よりあの教会、たまに嫌な噂を聞くしな。連中、貯めた財産根こそぎ取られるだけで済めばいいが。
After taking a few deep breaths, Tobimaru also headed towards the office building.
え？天下も事務所に行くの？怖くない？
行かねえよ、おっかねえ。俺のはちょっとした野暮用だ。てめえも補習に戻れよ。今日の礼はまた改めてくれてやるから。
ばっか、補習なんてもう終わってるじゃんか。気がつけばもうすぐ夕方だぜ、夕方。
違いない。あっという間の半日だった。
What a long day for him. Tobimaru waved goodbye and disappeared into the office building.
Huh?
Kinami thought it was strange since Tobimaru had just said that he wasn't going in there. However, he left as well after hearing a noise that sounded like glass breaking on the 3rd floor of the office building. A wise man never courts danger, as they say. Yeah, I believe it too. The discussion ended without any major issues. The inside of the office was mostly untouched, only the center line of desks had been pulverized by Sister Yuika. Things had been resolved peacefully without any bloodshed. The office had been conquered in about an hour, and Aoko was now surveying it. A large desk had gone right through the window, flung through the air with a single swing of Sister Yuika's hand. The sales staff were shaking in the corner like they'd just seen the devil incarnate. Sister Yuika brought in the 5 members of the cheer team to seize the office's permits and other important documents.
あれ？
Unfortunately, the one thing Aoko was looking for was nowhere to be found. She went to ask the sales staff, still quivering in the corner of the room.
ちょっと、3時間ぐらい前、ここに人畜無害そうなの来なかった？ビルから出てきてないから、まだ中にいると思うんだけど。
Everyone shook their heads no. Nobody had seen a student who fit that description in the office. Aoko was looking even more confused at this point.
でもまあ。
She was still happy that she had done a good deed here today. I hope we didn't just, antagonize the wrong company, or if we got things sort of twisted a little bit here. Tobimaru entered the office building and headed straight down the hallway. He glanced at the stairs in front of him as he walked by, passing several tenants and heading towards the emergency exit at the back of the building. Tobimaru knew the geography of 2nd Street well. If his memory served correctly, there were some old one-story houses behind this building that had been around forever. They were old tin-roofed rental houses that stood against the tides of time. Though overshadowed by the recent trend of 2-story apartments, they were still there, alive and kicking. At the back of the office building, there was a river for processing wastewater. Beyond the river and a fence, there were many one-story houses. Next to the building, there was a bridge that crossed over to the other side. It was a shortcut only neighborhood locals would know about.
なるほど。大したショートカットだ。地図なんて当てになんねえな。
As Tobimaru walked towards the bridge, he saw a familiar face exit one of the old tin roof houses. The young man was wearing a coat and was without a doubt Soujyuro Shizuki.
明日もまた来ておくれね。
Soujyuro crossed the bridge while the old woman who resided there saw him off.
あれ？副会長？
ああ、奇遇だな、色男。
The two exchanged glances as they crossed paths on the bridge. Soujyuro looked fairly spent. That was all Tobimaru needed to see. Sojuro's new job was a lot harder than working for any scam artists. So what is he actually doing? They both stopped to talk on the footbridge.
あの辺りに親戚でもいんのか？
いや、いない。 人づてに紹介されておばあさんの話し相手をしていただけだ。
For some reason, Soujyuro readily revealed that he had refused to tell Aoko.
そんな気軽に話していいのか？守秘義務とかありそうだが。
いや、秘密にしなくちゃいけない話でもないんだ。ただ話しちゃいけない気がしただけで、飛び丸には出てくるところを見られたし、正直誰かに言いたい気持ちはあった。
Leaning on the rail of the footbridge, Tobimaru urged him to go on. It turned out that Soujyuro's story was nothing out of the ordinary. His new part-time job was to be a home helper in that old one-story house. This resident was a widow who had been left alone after her son moved off into the city.
初めはただのお手伝いだったんだけどね。
He spoke with a troubled, slightly regretful smile. Maybe he was ashamed of something he'd done. There was a tinge of darkness behind the wry, tormented smile on his face. Tobimaru found himself surprised at his own thoughts and slapped himself lightly on the cheek. This was his way of punishing himself. He wasn't sure why his imagination was running so wild now.
珍しく浮かない顔だが。あれか？出て行った息子さんとやらに文句があるのか？介護が必要なおふくろさんを放って好き勝手に暮らしていることに？
どうだろう。確かにおかしな話だとは思う。けど俺はその息子さんを責める気にはなれない。だ
Soujyuro stopped himself mid-sentence. He didn't think the son hated his mother so much as he did the town. He had probably just found somewhere better to live and moved away. Soujyuro swallowed those bitter words.
お手伝いの料金は初めに全部もらってたんだ。今月だけという話なのに10万円は高すぎると思う。
He trailed off, muttering that he really didn't need that much money. The old woman had thanked him for his honesty. That was part of Soujyuro's appeal, most likely. In a matter of days, the old woman put all her trust into Soujyuro and treated him like her own grandson.
ああ、それは素直に嬉しいんだけど、問題は
She always saw him off with a smile and asked him to return tomorrow. Every time he left, she gave him a stack of cash in the hope that he wouldn't forget her.
あ？それだけで大金もらってたのか？
うん。お孫さんの代わりをしてほしいと言った。
Wow. Just straight up like that, too. And to be paid that much for it every day.
あなたは信じられるから、これで孫のように振る舞ってくれって。
なんだそりゃ。少しも信じてねえよそれ。金で動く孫がいるか？
いや、おばあさんはヘルパーさんにはお金は払わないと言った。信頼できないから。
Wait, if she's living here in this, like, dinky-ass house, how does she have all this money? Like, those two things don't really come together. That or she's just attached to where she lives and, well, savings, I guess. She seemed to have some quirks about her, probably because she'd been living alone for so long. By this point, she had lost all faith in the goodwill of humankind. To her, the bonds of a family were nothing but fantasy. After being cast aside by her own family for so many years, the only thing that remained faithful to her was the money she'd saved. Over time, this led to her developing a strange complex. For her, the money she'd scrimped and saved, the last thing she could rely on was the only way that she could conceive of keeping someone in her life.
バカらしい。
That is, actually.
それって結局金で雇った他人じゃねえか。
それはおばあさんが誰よりも分かってるよ。でも偽物だと分かっていてもそれぐらいしか信じられるものはなかったんだ。おばあさんにとって家に寄りつかなくなったお孫さんは今一番欲しいものだから。その代償として彼女が一番信用できるものを真心として渡してくれたんだ。
She wasn't buying him, though. She just trusted Soujyuro from the bottom of her heart and was thanking him the only way she knew how. She didn't realize how that looked from other people's perspectives, excuse me.
また厄介な事情に首突っ込んだもんだ。まあんまり深く思い詰めるな。いい話じゃねえか。命より金が大事だったばあさんが今になって思い出の方に転んだわけだ。まっとうな話だよ。
そうかな。
It was obvious from Soujyuro's expression that all of this still weighed heavily on him.
なんだよ。 煮え切らねえな。どうせお前さんのことだ。もらった金は一銭も使ってねえんだろ。んなことしてりゃいずれ年金も底をつく。そうなった時に丸々返すつもりだから青崎にも黙ってたんじゃないのか。
なんで飛び丸がそんなこと知ってるんだ？
まあいや、なんとなくそんな気がした。
Damn, he just pieced it together, just like that. That is crazy, though. What we thought for like 2 episodes here of Soujyuro being involved in a scam was just helping out a woman that definitely needs help of some sort, and she was just heavily paying him. It wasn't necessarily a real job, not in the sense of it being like under the table pay or a scam deal or anything like that. No, it was just, you're helping out and getting paid for it. That's really all this ever was. But our perspective of all of it was twisted in a way, and, well, at the end of the day, I think we did some good with Aoko and her squad because they were able to take down this company that was doing some harm for sure. But at the end of the day, like, 2 completely different situations. Pretty crazy, though. Tobimaru decided it was best not to tell Soujyuro about all the trouble that they went through for him today. He knew Aoko would only make him regret it later if he did.
そっか。でもこの話の一番難しいところはね、その人にはお孫さんはいなかったんだ。
What?
は？
After a few moments of surprise, Tobimaru let out a sigh. He understood. Being widowed with a son who's moved into the city and grandchildren who never visit, that was a normal, full, and rich life. Sometimes, however, a person's dreams were all that kept them going. The bottom is limitless. For every tragic life, there is another even more tragic than that.
時々油断すると思うんだ。みんな幸福そうに見えるのに、裏を覗くとそうでもないのはなんでだろうって。なんか街全体に騙されてるみたいだ。
Tobimaru leaned over the railing and looked down at the bustling town below. In the end, Sojuro's worries stemmed from his feeling lost in the environment. The woman who walked through life alone into old age, Tobimaru's struggle with being antagonized by his entire family. Those were both personal matters. Sojuro's problems stemmed from the nebulous entity of the town itself. And for every bit of progress made through modernization, there was also people living or left in growing misfortune. It didn't matter whether they were unequal in wealth or compassion, it was all the same. The larger a town grows, the harder it becomes for the weak to thrive. For a young man who spent his life in the countryside where everyone helped each other, this was hard to understand.
Soujyuro, お前、この町は好きか？
まだわからない。そういう飛び丸は？
まあ似たようなもんだ。好き嫌いも半々で、たまに何もかもどうでもよくなる時はある。だがまあ、お前さんとは真逆だな。俺はこの町のおかげで、てめえの悩みなんざ無視できる。ここに比べりゃマシだってな。空虚であろうと、この忙しさ、節操のなさは捨てたもんじゃねえってな。
ここに比べたらマシ？
違うな。マシというよりはありって感じか。バイトしてればたまに思うだろ。街ってのは隙間を作らないように回ってるんだ。欠席にしろ空席にしろ、空きができたらすぐに埋められるようにできている。当たり前のようで、こいつはよくできた共同体なんだよ。昨日までは誰でもなかった他人が、明日には必要な隣人になってるかもしれない。昨日まではなかった街角に新しい建物ができていることもある。まるで毎日が切った縫ったの大手術だ。それでもうまく回ってることに真剣に感心する。本当に何かの弾みで思うんだよ。
Oh, my bad.
俺はてめえだけで生きてるんじゃなくて、どうでもいい誰かのどうでもいい頑張りのおかげでこうして管負けてるんだってな。持ちつ持たれつだ。そういう巡り合わせを成立させているだけでもどんなバランスなんだって呆れるわけだ。
Just as the mountains are alive, so is the city. Tobimaru didn't seem to like the way that living creatures had manifested itself. Or that living creature, whatever. But even still,
そうか。
I guess the living
Kei
creature that is the
を払ってるんだな。
city.
まあ照れくさいがそういうこと。
As someone who was born and raised in the city, Tobimaru was thankful that complete strangers were able to help each other out.
つうかお前さんは贅沢すぎる。初めから好きなところに住めるやつなんていねえだろ。生まれる場所は選べねえしな。単純な話、自分が住むって決めたところを好きになるしかねえってことだ。
Tobimaru gave Sojuro's back a hard slap. It made Soujyuro straighten up his posture and snap him out of his slump a bit.
でも飛び丸、そこに住むって決めても好きになれなかったらどうするんだ？
どうしても好きになれないやつは違う土地に行けばいい。嫌なら逃げてもいいんだよ。放浪するのも人生だぜ。
It really is easier said than done, but it can be done. You aren't necessarily stuck where you are. If you really want to leave, there are ways. It will probably put you in a really, really fucked up hole for a while, and you may never be able to get out of that hole. But you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons here, or at least weigh how bad it is living where you are and not enjoying it, and trying to get somewhere else, but suffering because of that situation. And really the big thing is like finances. I believe money is kind of like the hardest part in trying to get to somewhere else to live. Soujyuro was so impressed with Tobimaru's words that he couldn't speak. They gave him a new perspective. It wasn't just the words "don't be scared to run away from a bad place." What had really left a strong impression was Tobimaru's confidence. Although he had been born in this town, he spoke freely of abandoning it.
飛び丸から逃げるなんて言葉が出るとは思わなかった。
逃げる先があるなら逃げてもいいだろって話。そりゃあ勝ちとか成功とかそういう言葉に固執するのも悪くはねえさ。だが俺にはどうも勝ち続けるっていうのは固まるってことに見える。息苦しくてしょうがない。
人生は軽い方がいいのか？
いや、軽いとか手堅いとかそういうんじゃなくて、俺はもっとこうロマンあふれるっつうか。
Tobimaru furrowed his brow at his inability to find the proper words. What he wanted was simple.
そうだな。俺はきっと笑える人生が送りたいんだ。
And that was how he saw life. Tobimaru tried his best to put into words his thoughts, hoping his friend would find them useful.
漫才師か？
Tobimaru's shoulders slumped in disappointment. But even so,
いや、そんなもんか。
the more he thought about it, the more he realized that Soujyuro wasn't really wrong. There was no end to human desire. The perfect life was an unattainable dream. The only way to really win was to be able to say with your dying breath that you had truly enjoyed living.
たく、青崎の影響かね。考えなしのバクとかっていうの。あいつ、ボニー&クライドとか大好きなんだろうな。
Tobimaru tiredly scratched his head. He never would have said something like this last year, considering how pessimistic he had been then.
ともかくだ。他人の事情にいちいち落ち込んでるようじゃ日が暮れるぜ。いや、実際もう暮れかけてるけどな。とんだ道草だ。
そうか。引き止めてすまなかった。飛び丸は他に用事が？
俺もおとなしく家に帰るとするか。そっちも日が落ちる前に帰れよ。何をしていたか聞かれたら隠さず事情は説明しとけ。
Sorry, I did the thing where like
お前が思ってるほどひでえ話じゃねえから。
my mouse pointer like just went just a little too far down like that. But honestly, really nice scene. Soujyuro frowned and fell silent. He still hadn't come to terms with his arrangement with that old woman yet. He hadn't gone there in the first place. Or if he hadn't gone there in the first place, she might not have felt like anything was missing from her life. That feeling of regret was exactly why he wanted to talk to someone.
お前、残酷なことをしたと思ってんだろ。ばあさんの人生に今からじゃ取り戻せないものを見せつけた。どうかな。
おう。
Soujyuro was stunned into silence. Tobimaru knew exactly what Soujyuro regretted.
そりゃ違う。思い上がりだぜ、宗十郎。いいか、そのばあさんも自分は人生に失敗したなんて思ってんなら、幸い金は腐るほどあるんだろ。
Seems like it.
なら思いっきり人助けをさせてみろ。金で救える不幸なんざ山ほどあるだろ。で、ばあさんがどんなもんだと胸を張れたんなら、それは間違いなくいい仕事だ。少なくとも俺は気持ちがいい。
それはおばあさんの苦しみを解決していない。
解決できねえ問題は放っておけ。そのばあさんには今他に解決できる問題があるんだから。悪いけどお金はこれから世のため人のため自分のために使うから返しておくれとなったらば、ばあさんの勝ち。偽物の孫なんざよりよっぽどいい生きがいに目覚めたわけだな。しかしこれで満足したから残りはやっぱりもらっておくれといえばお前さんの勝ち。ばあさんにとってはやっぱり孫の方がいいってことで、そん時は大手を振って大金持って帰りやがれ。
なるほど。
Soujyuro clapped his hands together. He was finally able to accept these conditions as fair.
すまない。ありがとう、飛び丸。
His smile was no longer bitter. He would do whatever he could to help that old woman choose to assist others in need. Tobimaru thought that such unwavering confidence was the sign of true freedom.
気にするな。礼を言うならお互い様だ。じゃあな、宗十郎。
His goodbye wasn't the friendliest, but Soujyuro didn't mind. He ran home with a big smile on his face. Tobimaru's smile was a bit less carefree as he left the footbridge. Excuse me, the time was 4:30 in the evening. Night would soon fall over the midwinter landscape. Oh, I'm glad we were able to piece things together a little bit there. Color me very surprised with how things ended up being, but, you know, I guess that's just kind of what we had going on for this little story here.
ただいま。今夜はまた一段と冷えるね。
And honestly, what a nice way that things were able to go. Learning a little bit more about Tobimaru, I think, actually painted a better picture for how things were supposed to kind of come together here with Soujyuro there in that last scene. So, definitely a lot of appreciation for the building up to this point that was done. Aoko and Alice were both in the drawing room when he returned. Neither of them had eaten dinner yet. Aoko looked displeased. Alice sat uncomfortably on the sofa.
あれ、もしかしてこっちの帰りを待っていたのか？
Alice quietly affirmed his assumption. Aoko vehemently denied it.
青崎、俺の気のせいならいいんだけど、なんだか昨夜以上にどうかしてないか？
Yeah, just a little bit. Soujyuro had gotten slightly better at reading the room, but he still had difficulty choosing the right words. I'll show you worked up, was what she wanted to say, but she stopped herself. She wasn't actually all that angry with Soujyuro, but...
どうかしてるの？青子。してないわよ。してるのは宗十郎の方だっていうの。
Yeah, I wonder about that. Alice's additional remarks seemed to have been the tipping point. Soujyuro thought this showed that she was indeed worked up about something.
しずきくんがどうかしたの？彼、今夜は比較的まともだけど。
Soujyuro felt like that was pretty offensive too, but let it slide.
もう分かったわよ。そっちから切り出すまで黙っていようと思ったけど、私の方から聞いてあげる。宗十郎、あんた、本物の光って名前に聞き覚えはない？
いや、全く。初めて聞いた。
Wait, so with Kinami, who the fuck? How did that all go down? Like, what was like valid in his story, or did we also misunderstand that?
でしょうね。
That was like my one remaining question.
なんだってあんな勘違いしちゃったんだろう。骨折り損とまではいかないけど、また良くない評判立てちゃった。
Aoko let out an exaggerated sigh and flopped down onto the sofa. Seeing Aoko in this weakened state was as an opportunity, The blue robin flew jauntily down from the sunroom.
見てたっす。自分見てたっす。ご近所じゃもうおひれつきまくりっす。青崎さんとこの娘さんがまた指一本で見せつぶしたとかマジパニー。
The robin continued to chatter praise for Aoko's deeds of valor. Uh-oh. Aoko knocked it away with a flick of her finger and picked herself up off the sofa.
今日はお金持ってないわね。例のアルバイトはもう終わったの？
いや、まだ続いているよ。あのお金は預かり物だから、朝のうちに口座を作って預けておいた。
預かり物？
そう、預かり物。きっと全額返すことになる。
Soujyuro took off his coat and began talking about his job at a home or as a home helper, and he kept it simple, explaining how things began and the conclusion that he'd come to with Tobimaru earlier. Aoko seemed stunned by the outlandish circumstances, but in the end,
はいはい、やっぱりね。安心したっていうか、がっかりしたっていうか。そうよね。どう頑張っても悪事を働ける人間じゃないわよね、あなた。
at least on purpose, she was back to her usual offensive self. However, there was another girl in the room who had at this point gone pale.
待って。ということは、それはしずきくんのお金ではないの？
Why do you ask? Did you do something with it?
ああ、人様のお金だよ。
Oh no.
アリス？なんかとんでもない顔してるけど、どうかした？
それが、どうかはしてないけど。
はい？
Alice handed out menus for the local soba noodle shop and a cafe. The blood drained from Aoko's face as she took everything in. Alice quietly passed her a small note. On it was a hastily written order that was more than enough food for the three of them.
まさかもう注文を？
だって、そろそろごちそうのタイミングかと思って。
So you took it upon yourself to use somebody else's money to do the treating. Alice's accusing gaze fell on Soujyuro.
俺？なんで？
そりゃあんたがいらない期待を持たせたからでしょう。アリス、あんなに喜んでたじゃない。
She
明日はごちそうねって。
She did bring it up the day prior. Soujyuro clapped his hands together for a second time today. He remembered that Alice had said that yesterday.
ええ。あの夜、しずきくんは同意してくれたわ。
I don't remember that part, but Alice was eager to emphasize that this was not her fault.
いや、それは。
そうね。アリスのミスなのは確かだけど、悪いのはあんたもよ。
That is
大
also a
金を
very
持ち
valid
歩くっ
point
ての
here.
は、それだけで危険なんだから、いい教訓になったんじゃない？観念して、二人で感情折半しなさいよ。
いや、それはできない。あのお金は預けてきたし、そもそも500円しか持ち合わせがない。
Oh.
そう。合わせても足りないわね。試したことはないけど。
An air of despair fell upon the Kuonji estate. Aoko sighed as if none of this involved her. She hated to coddle them, but perhaps this was her fate.
そうなるか。いいわよ。私が出してあげる。今日は臨時収入があったから、パーッと派手に使いましょう。
Aoko's sudden proposal made both Soujyuro and Alice perk up.
つまり、青崎のおごり。
そんな、信じられない。いいの、青子。
呼んじゃったものは今更止められないでしょ。
I mean, I'm sure you could try.
さっき電話したんなら、今頃はもう坂を登ってきてるだろうし。まあそもそも、このお金も宗十郎が発端だしね。人助けをしたら、被害者の会からお礼をもらっちゃったのよ。だから気にしないで。なんか居心地悪かったし、錠剤と思って商店街に還元する。本音言うと、ちょっともったいないけどね。
Her roommates began celebrating. Aoko sank back onto the sofa upon seeing the happiness her gesture brought.
ああ、悪戦身につかずって言うけど、ほんとその通り。臨時収入は泡と消えた。
I mean, that's just how it is with money, you know? If it's not being spent, then what are you doing? And thus, the curtain closed on a little incident involving a lot of cash. The blue robin flew down to the table again.
まったく嫌な山だったぜ。
The robin chirped and mimicked, puffing on a What?
まあそれはそれとして、
That was a little surprising.
青子さんの空回りっぷりを忘れないよう、これをカーモネーギー事件として記録しとくっすね。
The blue robin continued to laugh at that day's hero. How this bird is still alive, I'm not sure, but Alco flicked the bird away just as someone knocked at the door. Alice had ordered her favorite omelet dish and a set of cakes from the cafe.
まあそれなら
Alco was quietly satisfied with the spoils of an honest day's work. What a really interesting, like, situation overall. Like, it is so Soujyuro. It is so everybody else for their roles played here. Seeing, you know, just a little bit more to these characters. And like I said a little bit earlier with Tobimaru, really, just really nice to take away a lot from this one. So it was a little bit of a long extra, you know, chapter or whatever, but I'm glad we went through it. That was pretty fun. So I've been thinking about this little extra section here, and the thing is, I don't really know like how to feel about these extras. I'm not exactly sure what to expect. If it really is extra content to kind of just add to, you know, the enjoyment of this game or whatever, I'm kind of thinking maybe I should avoid any extra chapters. You know, if it doesn't add to the story, I'm probably not going to record it. I think that's probably just a little too much, especially right now. I'm going a little further than, you know, the guidelines state, and I want to be cautious. I'm already warning everybody, like, hey, we're in spoiler territory, technically. Yeah, I don't want to overdo it. So for now, I'm going to avoid these, and maybe in general, I will continue to avoid any extra chapters, but please, in the comments, if there is something that should actually be involved in the recording sessions or whatever, or if you think my reasoning is bad, by all means, yeah, just let me know in the comments. But for now, we will go into Chapter 9. Now that we're done with Chapter 8 and 8.5, and we got through all of that fun stuff, I think we're ready to continue on to whatever is going to be involved in this. You know, who's to say? The titles typically don't give it away too much, but, you know, I don't read too deeply into them, and I also forget about them, so we'll see what Chapter 9's got in store for us here. December, the month when even monks were busy at work. It was the culmination of the year. Perhaps due to all the put-off tasks built up through the seasons, the month always seemed to pass by in the blink of an eye. It was a day like any other in December. Though none of them were any the wiser to what the others were doing, Alco, Alice, and Soujyuro had spent the day attending to their own affairs. And the night just came.
これ
Alco kept the urge to kill out of her voice, but her menacing tone still reverberated in the room. The sunroom was often used to dine in when the weather was nice, since it overlooked the courtyard. It was a room decorated with high-quality furniture and upholstery befitting an historic Western-style mansion. The fusion of Chinese Chippendale aesthetics and traditional English Georgian elegance caused even Alco, a commoner, to think twice about doing any aristocratic on the anything unaristocratic on the grounds. There we go. Aristocratic. See, words good. Truthfully, she was sickened by the flagrant waste of money, but none of it was paid out of her own pocket, so she could have cared less what the purchasers spent their money on. 3 unbelievably out-of-place offerings sat atop the lavish sunroom's table, as if enshrined. In stark contrast to the room, they appeared like meals prepared by aliens.
総十郎これなんか新しい冗談
Aoko's trembling fists clenched and unclenched as she questioned the one responsible for today's menu. The clock struck 9 in the evening. Tonight's executive chef nodded dutifully, eager to explain.
これはうちの会社の新製品。パチモン臭いが中身は本当にパチモンだと木の実が言ってた。そんなことより評価すべきは社内販売なんで1個40円を切る低価格だ。
That's extremely cheap.
すごいぞ。卵をつけても60円とか。
The corner-cutting chef seemed pleased with himself. Aoko wanted to grumble that the real steal was her appetite.
そう、よかったわね。ところで、今日の夕飯はどこにあるの？
Haha, yeah, about that. Chef Soujyuro thought for a second or two and then clapped his hands together in realization.
青崎、そんなに食べると太るよ。
つまり、これが夕飯だって言い張る気なのね、あんたは。
I'm pretty sure that, like, these two gals here have eaten worse here before.
言い張るも何も、これ以外用意していない。
The two stood there glaring at each other. Aoko gave off an air that said that she would rather die than eat this food. And while Soujyuro was convinced that she would capitulate eventually. He even considered chiding her for being a picky eater. I don't think that's the problem here. As usual, the two could not see eye to eye.
いや、私は食べないからね、こんなの。
お姫様みたいなこと言うんじゃない。だいたい今日の夕食代はこれで3名様200円未満なんだぞ。
Again, very cheap, but you also get what you pay for. Soujyuro puffed his chest out at the penny-pinching prowess. Alice alternated her gaze between the two quarreling roommates and the strange food before her, which she had also never seen before. She remained a mere bystander in all of this.
信じられない。一人60円の食事って、あんた一体いつの生まれよ。このご時世、新しくできた牛丼屋ですら贅沢に原価上げてるわよ、バカ。
青崎、1ヶ月の食費が3万円だけで、あんな好き勝手な食生活をしていたら、俺が君たちに殺される前に全員が飢え死ぬと思うんだ。確かに、昨日のアリスの肉料理は素晴らしかった。グラム700円から肉は種類が変わるんだって感動した。生協の果汁 100% ジュースだって、ちょっと本気でバカにできるもんじゃないと反省したよ。けど、あれが3日続いたら、この家はどうなってしまうんだい？
Soujyuro was making perfect sense for once. Fortunately, neither Aoko nor Soujyuro noticed the silent stare of disapproval coming from Alice.
その時はその時よ。それにね、昨日みたいなのはめったにないの。アリスはあんたの料理に触発されて柄にもなく頑張ったみたいだけど。
With Aoko's words, Alice closed her eyes. She might have been trying to quell her anger.
信じられない。じゃあ、今までどんな生活してたんだ、青崎たちは。
その時はそれぞれで何とかやってたわ。飢え死に一歩手前ぐらい、いい精神修行じゃない。
Does it really, though? I don't know about all that. I don't think I'd be able to live peacefully whatsoever. Her brazen response left him speechless. Though a story for another time, Soujyuro remembered a warning from a certain vice president who had complained about a certain president incessantly bugging him to take her to lunch at the end of the month. But that was neither here nor there.
そんな昔のことより今のこと。前に見せたあの腕はどこに行ったのよ、宗十郎。あれを見込んで今日の夕飯を任せたっていうのに。
Out of everything, that seemed to be what ate at Aoko the most. The stir-fried yaki udon that had been prepared previously had been very well received. It had even melted away Aoko's morning grumpiness with just one bite. However, Soujyuro had not seen fit to tell, wouldn't be seem fit to tell, them that it was one of the only dishes in his limited repertoire. For a bachelor, the ability to cook is as close to a superpower as one could get. 15 years into the future, it would likely become a highly desirable trait. Yeah. Regardless, that misunderstanding had led Aoko and Alice to overestimate Sojuro's culinary talents. Her ire finally made sense to Soujyuro.
わかった。自腹を切るから出前を取ろう。作るにしても材料がないからな。その代わり、それは回収する。
Aoko basked in her victory. So what are we going to do with these bowls? It was then, after seeing Soujyuro's face as he went to fetch the delivery menu, Aoko realized her misreading of him. What annoyed Aoko most was the fact that such little effort was put into dinner. But to Soujyuro, the dinner had not been about cutting corners, but rather about a meal that he had legitimately wanted to try. Aoko ruminated on how it could possibly, or probably pass as food for someone raised in the mountains. And then...
アリス、何してるの?
Aoko noticed Alice standing near the table holding one of the bowls tightly.
もうそれはいいんだってば。宗十郎に返してきちんとした出前にしましょう。
Despite Aoko's words, Alice stood her ground, firmly clutching the bowl. In fact, she seemed to be embracing it.
これ、私のだから。
She's gonna eat it. No way. Alice's faint voice drifted across the sunroom. And just like that, the night's menu had been decided by majority rule. Aoko's shoulders sank in disappointment at her lot that evening. Come to think of it, Alice was always peculiar about things she deemed hers. Yeah, I've noticed that now a couple of times that's happened. It's very cute, don't get me wrong, but like, that definitely does give us like some confirmation on things. It was morning and there were 10 days left in December. While the rest of the city was preparing for Christmas festivities, Soujyuro headed to his part-time job. Though it looked like it could snow at any minute, the tree-lined streets were busy with foot traffic. These days were particularly merry. Students on winter break spent their days hanging out with friends while they counted down the days until the holidays. Colorful Christmas cakes lined storefronts, placed like charms to ward off evil. Huge advertisements adorned the sides of buildings. The station plaza bustled with pop-up stalls. Soujyuro stepped out of the milling crowd and into a phone booth. Who are we calling? Safe from the winter wind, the inside seemed warm by comparison. The thought that it would actually be nice to have one in the mountains crossed his mind as he inserted a coin into the phone. He dialed a number from memory, his fingers punching the keys with a somewhat practiced motion. After about 5 seconds, the phone began to ring. Another 5 seconds, another ring. 10 seconds had passed. He gazed through the window at the various signs of the surrounding buildings and marveled at the sheer number of people out and about so early. The number he dialed was that of Tobimaru Tsukiji. The Tsukiji name was well known in Misaki as a distinguished landowning family going back generations. Incidentally, their residence was located in the neighboring town of Yashirogi. A kind elderly female voice finally replaced the ringtone. After her polite greeting, she handed over the phone to Sojuro's target.
おはよう、飛び丸。
はい。おはよ
All right, he sounds great this morning. He was still half asleep, or so it sounded to Soujyuro.
一つ相談があるんだけど、いいか?
う。ああ、陽気に計らえ。
His response did not exactly inspire confidence in Soujyuro, but he cut right to the chase. There was a long pause. He was hard to read from this end of the receiver.
あのな、単純なことで俺を起こすな。いいか、宗十郎。仲が悪けりゃ遊びに行け。機嫌を取りたきゃいいとこ見せろ。で、それが合わなきゃ早めに手を切れ。俺ができるアドバイスはそんなもんだ。
Okay, so this started off with me thinking, okay, Aoko, but, what? And with a piece, Tobimaru hung up. It may have been 10 in the morning to Soujyuro, but after dealing with what seemed like a 6 o'clock Tobimaru, all he could do was nod earnestly. He had a feeling his friend had just been trying to end the call, but deep down he knew that the advice was sound. It's better than anything Kinumi has given us. Well, actually, I don't know. We were able to, I guess, not utilize it straightforward, but, you know, consider it nonetheless. After the phone ordeal, Soujyuro finished up his shopping and returned to the mansion just before noon. He was greeted by the sight of Aoko and Alice sitting in silent gloom. Though he was unsure of the circumstances from the outside looking in, it seemed like the aftermath of an argument. The silence was as deafening as a blizzard, or rather the biting cold and stinging wind of it. One might also compare the drawing room to an enormous walk-in freezer. It would not have been surprising to look up and see icicles hanging from the ceiling.
やっぱり、今日もか。
He felt like a zookeeper pained to see the raccoon and penguin at each other's throats. And in fact, he had seen this literally happen the other day at his zoo janitor job. And now he glanced between them like a zookeeper trying to gauge the animal's temper. Needless to say, the silence meant that they were not fighting at this moment. Dinner served as a respite from the conflict. Soujyuro was oblivious to the circumstances surrounding the quarrel, but their day-to-day or day-in, day-out battles against the mysterious mage was clearly taking a toll.
もっとも、アリスはいつも通りだけど。
I do actually gotta say, I'm in the okay range of how this title has been approaching just kind of the ordinary for a while. You know, like, we're following Soujyuro mostly here, and that, you know, we're not necessarily following what is going on in the magical side of things. That's not our world to really, you know, meddle in, and therefore the story has kind of kept us away from that. Just, you know, bits and pieces here and there, like what we just got, that they've been focusing on this, you know, enemy of some sort. And I'm sure at some point that will come about, but not yet. It will probably involve Soujyuro, and that's when we get to, you know, have that be the forefront yet again, you know, the magical side of things. But I do have to say, I'm totally fine with how their approach has been here. Across from the quiet, contemplative Aoko, Alice was reading an old book in her lap, as she was accustomed to. The book seemed somehow heavier than the other ones.
ただいま。煮詰まってるな、ここんところ。
He greeted them as he took off his coat.
煮詰まるぐらい事態が進んでるならまだ面白みもあるんでしょうけどね。今の御用よ、宗十郎。
ん?
Without quite knowing what Aoko was getting at, Soujyuro quizzically tilted his head. He told himself not to think too hard into it, but it only made him more curious.
煮詰まってるってことはもうじき完成ってことでしょ。進展がないって意味合いなら行き詰まってると言うべきね。
Seemingly too preoccupied to scold Soujyuro, Aoko waved her hand as though shooing off an insect. But Soujyuro being Soujyuro...
じゃあ言い直して。いや、あれから進展はあったかい?
Yeah, that is a better approach. Soujyuro held his ground.
宗十郎には関係ないわ。
Yeah, but then there's also that.
こっちの事情に関しては不可侵だって言わなかった？
Her response was calm but pointed. Surliness was her weapon of choice, and today she seemed determined to swing it at will.
もちろん聞いてる。ところで、お昼はまだだろ?
Soujyuro chose to brush off Aoko's attitude. If Aoko's weapon was surliness, Sojuro's was blitheness. He wielded just enough of it to make Aoko flinch.
どうしたの今日は？何かいいことでもあったわけ？
Soujyuro shook his head.
まだなんだ。じゃあ、ちょっと提案がある。
He dug around in the pocket of his coat, which was now on a hanger. Aoko gave him a dubious stare while Alice's ears perked up at his upbeat tone.
実は今日、給料日だったんだ。お金も入ったことだし、外に遊びに行こう。
He spoke with a warm smile as he removed his wallet from his coat pocket. The other two did not know what to make of it.
宗十郎。
She wanted to take exception to his bright mood, but found herself wrestling with the idea of reacting positively to it. After all, he was making a gesture of good faith to try and make things better with what little funds he had. The thought itself was not a bad one. While there was always the chance that Alice would keep quiet until the slightest thing annoyed her, at which point she would ruin everything, Aoko wanted to accept his goodwill. However, she was not in the mood to walk around town with either of the two, nor was the timing ideal.
悪いけど今忙しいの。暇になったら思い出してあげるからしばらく我慢して。
Alice seemed to give the same response, though wordlessly. Soujyuro was not about to be held back by the sullen mood.
忙しいって、ここで黙り合ってるだけじゃないか。徹夜漬けの時、気分転換は必要だって言ったのは青崎だろ。行き詰まったら回り右して戻らないと、どこにも行けない。
Soujyuro spoke with unusual confidence as he drew 2 tickets from his wallet and slapped them on the table. At first glance, they looked like advance tickets to a movie, but not quite. They were tickets to a famous aquarium. Ah, man, I've been wanting to go to an aquarium. Like, I've had multiple opportunities, but just never took it up. To get there, they would take the rapid train and subway to a city several times more modern than Misaki. It housed not only the biggest shopping mall in the prefecture, but also a multi-purpose auditorium set to open next year, designed to host international conferences and stage productions.
それと夜はメシアンでカレーでも食べてくれ。
Okay, that has to get their attention, right? Well, saying that, he slapped 2 bills on the table as if he had struck it rich. It was Sojuro's turn to make dinner tonight, after all.
じゃあそういうことで。
His business concluded, Soujyuro returned his wallet to his coat pocket. It was then that Aoko realized what Soujyuro meant by be seeing you.
ちょっと待った。そういうあんたはどうするのよ。
今日はアルバイト。
Soujyuro was almost too quick with his response, helping Aoko to see things for what they really were. Rather than for Sojuro's benefit, his gesture was instead an attempt to ease the tension that had built up between Aoko and Alice. Though, if asked, both girls would tell you it was an unnecessary gesture. Still, for him to pay this much attention to the household, if anything, gave Aoko reason to reflect on her own immaturity. Aoko glanced over to the still-seated Alice. At the same time, Alice peeked up at Aoko from behind her book. They kept still, staring at each other.
私は構わないけど、今やれることは全部やってあるし。
Oh, what perfect timing.
そうね。そういうことならせっかくだし。
Aoko stood up from the sofa, resigned to her decision. Soujyuro watched on, a satisfied smile on his face. It's not really what I had in mind necessarily for what was going to go down, but I mean, we gotta take it, right? 20 minutes later, as Aoko and Alice were done getting ready, Aoko called out to Soujyuro in the drawing room.
それじゃあ出かけてくるから、あんたもバイト。Soujyuro?
Soujyuro was crouched in front of the television, unaware that the two had entered the room.
もしかしてビデオいじってるの？
ああ、ちょうどよかった。青崎、これ。
Pausing his audio-visual struggles, Soujyuro turned around. Wow. The Aoko thighs. There's actually, like, I gotta say, at least for Aoko, she's got multiple, like, clothing styles that have popped up. I've only seen, like, a few for Alice. Like, there's her uniform, there's this, there's when she's wearing a coat, and I want to say that's pretty much it. But I feel like we've seen a lot for Aoko. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. He froze in shock, forgetting what he was going to say.
私たちお言葉に甘えて出かけてくるけど、どうしたのよ一体。
Soujyuro appeared to have gone stiff. Aoko stared at him curiously. Though Alice silently nodded along with his bizarre reaction, she kept her thoughts to herself.
いや、なんかこう。
I mean, they look good. They're honestly really, really well-designed characters. I do have to say that this game does have really nice character designs for the sprites, for the CGs. I mean, overall, it's really great. Still gawking, his voice stuck in his throat. He was blissfully unaware that the shock he was experiencing was the direct result of his emotional state.
それじゃわからないってば。まったく、落ち着いてるくせに妙に挙動不審なんだから。アリスに煙たがられても仕方ないっていうか。
Alice looked on in silence. He was not confused or in a daydream, and that much he could tell, but this frozen look was, by all accounts, a first for Soujyuro.
それで何かあったの？
ああ、いや、これなんだけど。青崎、ビデオってどう使うんだ？
Shaking his head to regain his composure, Soujyuro pointed to the VCR. A VHS player sat on a shelf beneath the TV. Okay, to everybody watching, please tell me you know what a VCR is, please, because I am getting to an unfortunate point in my life where I'm meeting people that don't know what a VHS player is, a VCR, or a tape. They don't know what tapes are. Like, this is getting scary, guys. That was a pretty significant, like, form of media. It was pretty popular.
何？タイマー録画でもするの？
Alko walked over and crouched next to Soujyuro in front of the TV.
いや、木の実からビデオを借りたんだけど映らない。
Oh shit.
まずテレビの電源が入ってない。
Yeah, that would help. With a click, the TV screen flickered alive.
次、チャンネルを外線に合わせて。あら、意外にも真っ黒。木の実くんのことだからテープ頭から録画してると思ったけど。
Yeah, that actually was a downside to tapes because it really was like a physical start to end. That's how it was. The media was literally on the tape. So, if you didn't start it at the very beginning of the tape, then it becomes a little annoying trying to figure out where the start of the actual video was on the tape. During this time period, videotapes were still rather expensive. Therefore, it was only natural for people to not want to waste a single second of the tape's 120-minute capacity.
割と趣味には気を使う性格なのね。じゃ、早送りっと。
Okay, time for me to ramble for like another minute, so if you want to, fast forward like a minute or so, by all means. Yeah, I grew up on tapes, if you could not tell. That was like my introduction to like a form of video media on something like that. I mean, sure, DVDs were also coming up like right then and there. CDs were also very popular for music, but tapes, like for music, for video, was very much more affordable. So I kind of grew up with that. I had a lot of movies and shows that were on tapes. I was a Nickelodeon kid, so I had some of the orange VHS tapes. So if you guys know about that, hey, you had it good. But something that I did is, as a kid, we had a lot of blank tapes that you could just buy and you could just, use to record. And my VCR, luckily, had the functionality to record whatever the hell was on the screen. So that helped for like, I want to be able to watch, that SpongeBob movie as many times as I want, but not have to go out and buy it. Well, I could just record it once, and now I've got it forever. So that was pretty cool. What I'm getting at here is that with that recording function, I used to be a bit of a gamer on the PlayStation and PlayStation 2. I would actually just record my gameplay. I would go through Kingdom Hearts, I would go through Sly Cooper and a lot of these other games and just record them. And unfortunately, there was nobody that could really watch them, but that was actually my weird introduction into the interest of I like recording my gameplay and trying to get others to watch it at least, or at least having that desire. So many years later, here I am, not necessarily with a tape, not necessarily with the games that I was playing back as a kid, but yeah, I mean, it kind of connects a little bit, You guys see the connection? Am I crazy? Alko picked the small remote up, and quickly pushed the video, or the button marked FWD, the forward button, fast forward. The VCR beeped in protest. With several clicks and thuds, there was an empty whir from within the machine.
壊してないぞ、多分。
The vast majority of people who say this are actually very prone to destroying electrical equipment, but that is a separate matter. I mean, yeah, it is actually...
テープが入ってない。
There's no tape? Wait, is it just like the exterior of the tape? As soon as the words left her lips, it all made sense.
テープ？
Soujyuro imagined adhesive tape, clearly confused.
宗十郎、木の実くんから何か渡されなかった？
渡されたけど、ほら、テーブルの上。
Though she could have been used to it by now, she caught herself wondering if Soujyuro was being stupid deliberately.
木の実くんが何て言ったか覚えてる？
テープ貸してやるから、家に帰ったらビデオを見ろ、と。
一番大事な言葉が抜けてたわけね。はあ、失望を通り越して怖くなるわ。あっさり順応しているように見えてこれだものね。どんだけ綱渡りな毎日送ってんのよ、あんたは。
Exasperated, Alko fetched the tape in question. It was labeled Gaku Gaku Animal Kingdom African Adventure. What the fuck? What exactly is this man trying to show Soujyuro? To Aoko, this knocked Hosuke Kinami down a level on the ratings file that she kept with the student council.
で、このテープをデッキに入れて再生すればいいの。爪は折ってないから、録画ボタンだけは押さないようにね。
爪とは？
ここ。テープの側面にへこみがあるでしょ。これをカバーしているのが爪。これを切り取っておくと、もうそのテープは上書き録ができなくなるのよ。そうね。例えるなら授業のノート。大事なものだから消しゴムで消えないようにフィキサチーフをかけたっていうか、ヒューマンエラーを物理的に防止するアナログな防御法ってわけ。
I actually didn't know about that. There's a tab that basically makes it so you can like permanently, like the tape is permanently set. That's so interesting. The thing is, I never really understood the technology of it. I understand it's like a magnetic thing, I'm pretty sure, but yeah, I don't know. I don't understand how a whole lot of technology works. That's kind of like what I'm going through in Umineko right now, where if you don't understand how something works, but you know that there is an explanation for it, I mean, you can still kind of tie it into whatever you want, you know? Well, we could say a bunch of little gremlins are just painting the tape or whatever, because my dumbass doesn't understand how it all works. She inserted the tape into the VCR and handed the remote to Soujyuro. Just this small interaction used up a fair bit of Aoko's patience. Completely ignorant of Aoko's feelings, Soujyuro gleefully pressed the play button.
前から危なっかしいと思ってたけど、まさかここまでとはね。時代錯誤にも程がある。あんた、山で何やってたの？空手家じゃあるまいし、熊を倒す修行でもしてたとか言わないでしょうね。
Even Soujyuro managed to pick up on Aoko's rude tone, as he frowned disapprovingly.
それはもしかして俺をバカにしてるのか？
So you're starting to get it, Soujyuro. You're finally starting to get it.
心外ね。事実バカにしてるんだけど。
Aoko answered unapologetically. On the TV, a crocodile's yawning mouth appeared.
そんなバカな話があるもんか。なんで熊を倒すために修行しなくちゃいけないんだ。
Soujyuro turned toward the TV in a huff. Perhaps because of his rare outburst, as he turned face to face with the gaping maw of the crocodile on the TV, well, he fell backwards in surprise. Aoko unpursed her lips upon seeing this, delighted. It was relieving to see the boy disarmed.
けど青崎、この機械ずいぶん埃が積もっているけど、掃除はしていないのか？
私はあんまり使わないし、アリスは見ないから今までほっぽってただけよ。
Why do we even have this here?
ダメ元でトレーニング用に買ってもらったんだけど、飽きちゃった。イメージでどうにかできる問題じゃなかったっていうか。
That's how that works. Whatever. Aoko shrugged at her past superficiality. And Soujyuro was led to believe yet another falsehood about modern life, that VCRs would go out of fashion.
それじゃあ留守番お願いね。バイト、本当はないんでしょ？
Oh, wait. What? Aoko walked out of the drawing room smiling. So that was all just a ruse. He wants the two of them to be together, and he's gonna stay out of it. Her grin was the cheap shot that left Soujyuro speechless. As he scratched his cheek, he was reminded that she was not someone to be trifled with. After watching the end of the drama between her housemates, Alice made for the reception area as well. Left alone in the room, Soujyuro took his seat on the sofa. Well, it was certainly not easy making everything run smoothly around these parts. Until they came back, well, he can enjoy his crocodile watching in peace. Is this like really something he wanted to do? He wanted to watch, like, wildlife? I mean, to each their own, and based on where he came from, yeah, you know, I guess, but I don't know. But alrighty, I think we'll wrap it up there now that we are, you know, securely somewhat in Chapter 9. So, you know, making progress, surely, but, you know, slowly but surely. That's what I'm looking for. But, yeah, thank you all for tuning in. Glad we were able to get things straightened out with whatever the fuck Soujyuro is involved in. That was pretty interesting stuff. And now we're on to a whole new adventure with these three. Thank you all for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take it easy.